So the first thing we talked about was state, right? That most salespeople state is not good. That's a huge problem. The next thing we're going to talk about here story, your stories. And so most salespeople have really, really, really crappy stories. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean by stories. So stories basically like what you believe about something, right? And there's lots of different stories that salespeople have and they're not good. So we're gonna look at the types of different beliefs. We're gonna look at what those are for most salespeople. And then we're gonna look at what they should be. And then we're gonna look at basically how problematic it is to have those negative beliefs and why it's important to switch those. And it'll be very, very clear by the end of this short video that this is an enormous problem. So we have story about sales itself. We have stories about that salesperson themselves in relation to sales. So we'll say them in relation to sales. We have stories about the salesperson in relation to the prospect, so themselves in relation to the prospect. They have stories about how the prospect will respond to them. They have stories about the product or service they sell. They have stories about the competition. And then they have other miscellaneous stories. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment. So, let's go through these. They're important. So most salespeople, what do they think about all this stuff and why does it matter? Story about sales. Most salespeople think that sales is kind of sleazy and pushy and manipulative and deceitful and maybe even aggressive, and it's about being a trickster, and the best trickster wins, or the best talker wins. A lot of negative ideas about what sales itself is, right? That's a problem, because if you think what you're doing is manipulative and terrible, probably not going to do a very good job of it, right? Them in relation to sales. Most salespeople think I suck at selling. This is just not me. I'm not very extroverted. Why am I even doing this? I'm not the type of person that does this. I'm not good at this, whatever, right? So far we've got people think sales is manipulative and terrible and that they suck at it. So gonna be hard for them to do a good job and sell a lot for your company, right? That's a problem. We've got them in relation to the prospect. So I think most salespeople see their relationship to the prospect as sort of like an adversarial one, as like it's me against them, and it's like this tug of war, or this fight or battle or trickster match or whatever. And I think that's how most of them see it. And in my opinion, that's a problem. I don't think you're gonna sell as much that way. We've got how the prospects will respond to them. So most salespeople think their story, right? Their belief is, this person's not a buyer, they don't look like they have money, they look like they're in here to just waste time, they're just gonna reject me like the last person did, they have all these stories about how the person is for sure gonna say no before anything has even happened. That's a problem. That's gonna affect their ability to sell. Product or service they sell. A lot of salespeople don't even believe in their product or service, and they don't know it very well, right? Maybe if they knew it better, they'd believe in it more, or if it's a shitty product or service, maybe they shouldn't be there. But assuming whoever's watching this, that your company is a good product or service, a lot of the salespeople, they might not know enough about it, or they might not believe that. Sometimes you hear salespeople say like, oh, our product sucks. I would never buy this. I don't know why anyone buys this. So if you think your product or service sucks, that's gonna make it trickier for you to sell it. That's a problem. Stories about your competition. Most salespeople believe their competition is better than them. They believe, they believe things like, oh, that those people over there are offering so much more or so much better for so much less money. And, we're way overpriced and we don't offer enough and we're nothing compared to them. And I don't blame the prospect. And if I was a prospect, I would buy over there too. And, how are we supposed to compete with them? And so a lot of them are sort of defeated in the prospect category before they even start as well. That's a problem. And then miscellaneous stories. So this one's kind of funny, but just all the other stupid stories that salespeople have, like, the economy's bad. Who would ever buy a house or a car or coaching or consulting or advertising spending or whatever, right? Who would ever buy this? And in this economy, when things are going the way they are, or maybe they say the day of the week, right? Like, oh, it's Monday, nobody comes in on a Monday because people are at work, or, it's raining, and like, oh, nobody comes in when it's raining, like, we're not gonna sell anything, right? All of these miscellaneous stories that salespeople have, right? Those are problems. And so why do these matter? So you can think of stories, I wanna give a couple different brief analogies of what they are and how they work, because I think this will be helpful. One analogy is the train on a train track. All right, that's my train on a train track. So you can kind of think of stories a little bit like a train on a train track, that we are the train moving along, right? And the track is our stories, or are our stories. The tracks are our stories. So the train will kind of always follow the track, right? This train is not going to just fly off this track and go over here, especially if there's no track over here, because that's not possible, right? That's not the way the train works. And this is true with our stories too. So, if we have all these stories, the odds that we're just going to fly off all those stories and go a totally different direction and become a superstar, high performer salesperson when the person walks in the door, even though we currently believe all this and we're going this way, but now we're going to go that way, it's almost zero. Almost zero. That's a problem, right? There's another example that I like to give. So you remember when you're younger and you're in math class and they're like, x equals da-da-da, y equals da-da-da. What does z equal, right? Solve for z. Maybe it's geometry or algebra and they've got some shape and you gotta solve, right? Something like that. They give you these givens, and then you have to use the givens and solve for the thing that's not given, right? That they're asking for. And so you can sort of think of stories a little bit like givens. It's a little bit like when in math class they give you this, they're saying solve this based on these rules, on these guidelines, on these givens of how this works. And so your stories are almost like your rules or your guidelines of how you should or will act in a given situation. So in the given situation of sales, right, which is what we're talking about, if you have all these stories, it's almost like your train tracker, it's almost like your math equations of like, these are our rules of how we're going to act in this given context when these things happen. When these things happen, when we're selling, when the prospect comes in, when we're at work, these are all our rules that we're gonna be operating under to solve for the equation, and solving for the equation is like making a sale, right? So it's sort of like we're gonna go by these things. And I think most salespeople, one, they don't really realize that's how that works, and two, they don't even realize how bad all their stories are, and three, they don't realize that you can't really go against those, and four, they don't realize how much money they're leaving on the table, and five, they don't realize what their good stories should be, and six, they don't realize that those are actually changeable, and that other high performers have different stories, right? So as you can imagine, so far we've got, let's say their state is a 3.5, right? Let's say you've got a sales team of 50 people or whatever you've got, and their state's a 3.5. And then in terms of their stories, they think sales is manipulative. They think they suck at sales. they think that the relationship between them and their prospect is adversarial, and they think the person's for sure going to say no anyway, and they think what they sell sucks, they think their competition's way better than them, and they think it's rainy and cold and it's a Monday and they're not going to sell. So you put all these things together, their state is terrible and all their stories are terrible. You know, I would say the average salesperson, let's say if we also gave their stories like a 3.5 on a scale of 1 to 10, hard to say, right? This is not exact math, that's impossible. I'm just kind of trying to give you some checkpoints to give you an idea. If the state and the stories of your salespeople are 3.5 and you want them to go out there and perform, and you wonder why they're not performing, huge reasons right here, right? These are a lot of the reasons. And so let's just briefly go over what they should be thinking. Let's say maybe you've got 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, you know, the really high performing people. What are their stories? Their stories are different. People who are getting better results are thinking better things. Not that thinking is the only thing that matters, right? Actions matter, there's all these things that matter, but they are definitely thinking different things. So let's say about sales, they're thinking, well, I don't know what they're thinking, but I'll give you examples of what they could be thinking, or maybe more or less what I was thinking, or I guess that I still think, right? Because I'm still in sales. Even though I have my own business now, still sales. About sales, they're thinking that, you know, sales is an honorable profession and that they had the opportunity to help somebody to solve a complex problem, and that's really a blessing, right? So you could imagine that will make a difference in how they sell. Them in relation to sales. I'm an amazing salesperson. I'm great at this, and I'm a great problem solver, and I believe in my ability to help my customer. That'll make a difference in how much each person sells. Them in relation to their prospects. I'm really excited to be able to meet this person and to guide them and to help them and to work with them to find whatever it is that they're looking for. Collaborative versus adversarial, right? That'll change how much each person sells. How prospects will respond to them. Good story would be that the prospect's gonna be to really appreciate my help and my guidance and my desire to help them to solve their problems, and that I'm gonna help them to find what they're looking for and that they're gonna buy. That'd be a good story. That will change how much each person sells. Product, service they sell. I sell an excellent product, and if it's the right fit for my person, then I'm gonna encourage them to buy. That's a good story. Again, it's not about getting everybody to do everything, right? Some people are just not prospects, that's okay. It's just about not leaving anything on the table. Stories about competition. I know my competition well. I know what their strengths and their weaknesses are. I know how to sell against them. And if my product or service is the right fit for the customer, then I'm gonna strongly encourage them to buy. That's a good story. That'll change how much you sell. And then miscellaneous stories, right? So the economy, the weather, all these things. I think you just have to look at it like there are always going to be people who are looking for something. And if somebody has gone into your establishment of whatever product or service you sell, their dissatisfaction has reached a certain level that they've got up out of their house and walked into where you are and are willing to deal with the salesperson, which they don't want to do because they have a problem that needs to be solved. And so you can assume that those things are going on with them, and you don't want to put too much weight on those miscellaneous things. You know, that stuff should have nothing to do with anything, right? That you're gonna show up regardless, and you're gonna help people regardless, that there are gonna be people who want help regardless, and you're going to help them. Right? So you can imagine if all of your people's state was a 10, they're showing up to everything, multiplied by how many people you have, multiplied by 365 days a year. And their stories were a 10, meaning they believed all these good things instead of all of these crappy things. It would totally change how they sell. Massive change. Now you might say, well, Justin, how do I get them to believe all these things when they believe all the negative things? Like, can they really just snap their fingers and do that? And I would say yes and no. I would say the first step is to realize they've got all these. The second step is to realize how these work and how problematic they are. The third step is to realize, they can change them and these are the things that they should have. And then the fourth step is to just practice those new beliefs, practice holding them in your head, practice acting upon them by the way you're showing up in the world. And there will start to be a shift. In the beginning you've internalized all these crappy stories, but you will slowly start to internalize these good stories. And I would say within 2, 3, 4 weeks, within a short amount of time, all of a sudden you're starting to believe something different, right? So maybe not completely changeable right in 1 second, but you can start changing them and you can start improving them, and they can fairly quickly internalize, and now you're thinking like this type of person instead of the negative one, right? So as you can see, enormous impact on what we sell, on how much we sell, right? On how many sales we make. So we've gone over state, story. Now we're gonna move to the next item.